Ever catch yourself wondering, like, why we even have e-governments? What's stopping everything from just, like, collapsing into total chaos?
Yeah.
Well, strap in, because today we're diving into the work of Thomas Hobbes,
Oh, wow.
a 17th century philosopher who had some seriously intense thoughts about these very questions.
Okay.
We're looking at an excerpt from one of his writings, but even this little piece has a lot to unpack.
It does. It does.
I think what's so fascinating is that even though Hobbes was writing way back then, his ideas still resonate today,
They do.
especially in a world full of conflict and uncertainty.
Right.
All right, so first things first, who was this Thomas Hobbes guy?
So Thomas Hobbes was an English philosopher
Okay.
who lived from 1588 to 1679.
Okay.
And his most famous work is called Leviathan,
Leviathan.
which he published in 1651.
Okay.
It was a time of massive upheaval in England.
Oh, okay.
Think civil war and political chaos.
Oh, wow. So really time to be thinking about government and social order, huh?
Exactly. And that context really shaped Hobbes's thinking.
Yeah.
He was trying to figure out how to create a stable society amidst all that turmoil.
Okay, so what was his, like, big idea?
Well, it all starts with this thought experiment he called the state of nature.
Okay.
Imagine a world with no government, no laws, no police,
Okay.
just pure, unfiltered human nature.
Okay, I'm picturing something out of a post-apocalyptic movie, but without the cool zombies.
Right.
What did Hobbes think would happen in this state of nature?
Well, he had a pretty bleak view.
Okay.
He famously said that life in the state of nature would be solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short.
Yikes. That's not exactly a selling point for anarchy.
Right.
Why did he think things would get so bad?
It all comes down to his view of human nature.
Okay.
Hobbes believed that at our core, we're driven by self-preservation.
Okay.
We want to survive, and we want things that help us survive,
Yeah.
like food, shelter, and power.
Yeah. So it's not that people are inherently evil, but more that without rules, we'd all just be scrambling to get what we need.
Right, and that constant competition would lead to endless conflict.
Okay.
Imagine everyone constantly suspicious of each other,
Yeah.
always looking over their shoulder, never knowing who to trust.
Right. It would be like trying to cooperate in a game of dodgeball. Everyone's out for themselves and someone's always about to get hit. So how do we escape this nightmare scenario?
Well, that's where the social contract comes in.
Okay.
This agreement where we willingly give up some of our freedom in exchange for the protection and order that a government can provide.
So we're trading some freedom for security. What exactly are we giving up in this deal?
Well, think of it like paying taxes.
Okay.
You might not like it, but you agree to it.
Yeah.
Because in return, you get roads, schools, police, and all these things that make society function.
I see what you mean. But who's in charge of enforcing all this?
Well, that's where the Leviathan comes in.
Ah, yes, the Leviathan.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like a mythical sea monster.
Right.
Who or what exactly is this Leviathan in Hobbes' world?
It's his term for the absolute sovereign.
Okay.
The ultimate authority that makes the rules and enforces them.
Wait, hold on. Absolute authority.
Yeah.
That sounds kind of intense. Is he talking about a king or a dictator?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
It could be a king, a parliament, or some other form of government.
Okay.
For Hobbes, the important thing is that it has the power to maintain order
Okay.
and keep us from descending back into the chaos of the state of nature.
But doesn't that kind of power create a risk of tyranny? What's to stop this Leviathan from abusing their authority?
Right.
I mean, this is where it starts to feel a bit unsettling, right?
You're hitting on a major point of contention.
Okay.
And that's where we'll pick things up in part 2 of this deep dive.
Ooh, cliffhanger.
Yeah.
I'm definitely hooked.
Great.
But before we move on, I want to make sure I'm understanding this correctly.
Uh-
Hobbes is saying that because human nature is naturally self-interested, we need a powerful entity to keep us all in check.
That's the gist of it. But there's a lot more to unpack.
I bet.
Yeah.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of Thomas Hobbes.
Yeah.
Last time we left off with this idea of the Leviathan, this all-powerful entity that keeps society from imploding.
All right.
It's a powerful image, but I gotta admit,
Yeah.
it raises some red flags for me.
It definitely makes you think, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And you're not alone.
Okay.
One of the biggest criticisms of Hobbes
Yeah.
is that his ideas could be used to justify some pretty nasty forms of government.
Yeah. I mean, if the Leviathan's power is absolute and unquestionable,
Right.
what's to stop them from turning into a dictator?
That's a key concern.
Okay.
Critics argue that giving any one entity unlimited power is basically asking for trouble.
Yeah.
It creates a system where people have no recourse.
Mm-hmm.
If the government becomes oppressive or unjust...
It's like that saying, power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Right.
Did Hobbes have any response to this concern?
He did,
Okay.
but it might not be what you'd expect.
Okay.
Hobbes argued that the dangers of a powerful sovereign were far less
Okay.
than the horrors of returning to the state of nature.
Okay.
He actually thought that even a bad ruler was better than no ruler at all.
So he's basically saying it's a choice between a dictator and total anarchy.
Well,
It's like picking between two really bad options.
it's more nuanced than that.
Okay.
Remember, for Hobbes, the goal was to create a society where people could live without constant fear and violence.
Okay.
And he believed that a strong central authority was the only way to achieve that,
All right.
even if it meant sacrificing some individual freedoms.
Okay, I can see his logic there,
Mm-hmm.
but it still feels like a pretty risky gamble, doesn't it?
Right.
I mean, how do you guarantee that the Leviathan won't abuse their power?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And it's a debate that's still going on today.
Right.
How much power should we entrust to our governments?
Yeah.
What safeguards do we need to protect individual rights?
Right.
These are fundamental questions that every society grapples with.
So even if we don't completely agree with Hobbes,
Right.
he's forcing us to think about these issues in a new way.
Absolutely.
Okay.
He's pushing us to examine the trade-offs between freedom and security and to really consider what we're willing to sacrifice for the sake of stability.
Okay, so all this talk of absolute rulers and social contracts,
Yeah.
I have to ask, what would Hobbes think of democracy?
It's an interesting question.
Yeah.
Hobbes lived through some pretty intense political turmoil in England,
Okay.
including the English Civil War,
Right.
where the king was overthrown and executed.
Wow.
So he was deeply skeptical of any system that gave too much power to the people.
He sounds like someone who would hate Twitter.
He might have had some reservations, yes.
Yeah.
He believed that democracies could easily descend into mob rule. Okay.
Where the passions of the majority could trample on reason and individual rights.
Right.
Remember, he had a pretty pessimistic view of human nature.
Yeah.
So he wasn't exactly optimistic about our ability to govern ourselves wisely.
It makes you wonder what he'd make of the world today.
Right.
With all the political polarization and online echo chambers?
Right.
Yeah.
It's fascinating to think about how his ideas might apply to the challenges of our digital age.
Mm-hmm.
We're seeing new forms of power emerge.
Right.
And we're still grappling with the same questions about how to balance individual freedom
Yeah.
with the need for order and security.
It's kind of mind-blowing that a philosopher from the 1600s can still be so relevant today.
I know, it's amazing.
But I have a feeling we're just scratching the surface here.
Yeah.
What else do we need to cover in our Hobbesian deep dive?
Well, we've talked about the state of nature,
Yeah.
the social contract,
Yeah.
the Leviathan,
Right.
and even touched on democracy.
Yeah.
But we haven't really explored Hobbes's lasting legacy.
Okay. His ideas have had a massive impact on political theory,
Okay.
legal systems,
Okay.
and even how we understand international relations.
Welcome back, deep divers.
Hmm.
We've been wading through some pretty deep philosophical waters with Thomas Hobbes.
I know, right?
And honestly, my head is still spinning from all the big ideas we've unpacked about human nature and the role of government.
It's a lot to take in.
Okay, so we've explored the state of nature, the social contract, the Leviathan.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm curious, how did his thinking actually influence the world?
Well, for starters, Hobbes is considered one of the founding fathers of modern political philosophy.
Okay.
His focus on the individual, the idea of a social contract, and the role of the state, all of this laid the groundwork for a whole lot of political thought that came after him.
So even if we might disagree with some of his more extreme conclusions, he fundamentally changed the way people view the relationship between citizens and the government.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Think of it this way. Before Hobbes, the dominant idea was that kings and rulers got their authority from God, right? The divine right of kings.
Mm-hmm.
But Hobbes shifted the focus to a more secular and rational understanding of political authority.
Okay, so instead of it being all about God's will,
Yeah.
it's more about this agreement, this social contract between the people and the government.
Exactly.
It's almost like he's laying the foundation for modern ideas about democracy,
Yeah.
even if he wasn't totally on board with those ideas himself.
You're picking up on a really important point.
Okay.
Hobbes was deeply skeptical of democracy, as we discussed earlier.
Right.
But his emphasis on the individual and the idea that government power comes from the consent of the governed, those ideas became building blocks for thinkers like John Locke.
Oh, John Locke.
Yeah.
Wasn't he a big influence on the American Revolution,
Yeah,
with natural rights and all that?
Precisely. And Locke was building on the foundation that Hobbes had laid.
Really?
It's like Hobbes provided the blueprint, and then Locke came along and started adding new wings and features.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
So even though Hobbes himself wasn't a big fan of democracy, his ideas helped pave the way for it in a roundabout way.
Precisely. And it's not just democracy.
But
His concept of the social contract has become central to modern legal systems all over the world.
wow.
Even though we don't literally sign a contract when we're born,
Yeah.
the idea that our rights and obligations as citizens are based on a kind of agreement with the state is incredibly influential.
It makes you wonder, though,
Yeah.
what would Hobbes think of democracy as we know it today, with all its messiness and complexities?
Right.
Would he see it as a success story or a cautionary tale?
It's hard to say for sure,
Yeah.
but given his skepticism about popular rule and his emphasis on the need for a strong sovereign,
Yeah.
he might have some reservations.
Okay.
He might worry that too much individual freedom could lead to instability and that we still need powerful leaders to prevent things from descending into chaos.
So in a way, we're still wrestling with that same fundamental tension that he identified.
Yeah.
The need to balance individual liberty with the need for order and security.
And that's not just true within individual nations.
Right.
Hobbes' ideas have also had a profound impact on how we understand international relations.
Yeah.
Really? How so?
Well, think back to the concept of the state of nature.
Okay.
Some scholars argue that the international system is kind of like a global state of nature.
Interesting.
There's no world government with the power to enforce rules on all countries.
Right.
So you have these powerful nation states, each acting in their own self-interest,
Yeah.
often competing for resources and influence.
So it's like Hobbes' state of nature, but on a global scale.
Yeah,
Instead of individuals vying for power, it's countries.
exactly.
That's a pretty unsettling thought.
It is, and it helps explain why international relations are often so complex and fraught with tension.
Okay.
It's a world of shifting alliances, power struggles, and the constant threat of conflict.
Okay, so not exactly a utopia.
Yeah.
But it does make you appreciate how Hobbes' ideas can help us understand the big picture of global politics.
Mm-hmm.
He's not just some dusty old philosopher. He's actually relevant to the world we live in today.
Precisely.
Whether we agree with all of his conclusions or not, his work forces us to think critically about the foundations of power,
Yeah.
the nature of government,
Mm-hmm.
and the challenges of building a stable and just society, both within nations and on a global scale.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Wow. So what does it all mean? What should we as 21st century citizens take away from our deep dive into the world of Thomas Hobbes?
I think the biggest takeaway is this.
Okay.
Hobbes, even though he could be controversial, pushes us to question our assumptions about how society works.
Yeah.
And about human nature itself.
Yeah.
He makes us consider the delicate balance between freedom and security,
Mhm.
the justifications for government power,
Right.
and the potential consequences of both too much and too little authority.
I like that.
Yeah.
It's not about agreeing with him wholeheartedly, but about using his ideas as a springboard for deeper thinking about the world around us.
Exactly.
And who knows, maybe by wrestling with these big questions, we can even find some insights that help us navigate the complexities of our own time.
I agree.
Well said. And for our listeners out there, I hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity and given you some new perspectives to ponder.
Mm-hmm.
If you were designing a society from scratch, how much power would you give to the government? What freedoms would you be willing to give up in exchange for security and stability? And what do you think Hobbes would say about the world we live in today? Keep exploring these questions.
Yeah, keep thinking.
You might be surprised by what you discover.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.